20 years ago, if you came here to the Meatpacking District, you looked around, you'd never eat beef again in your life. You'd see half the carcasses hanging and everything. But within the last 10 years, they very modernized this place.
25 years ago, right? It was all warehouses, all meat markets. To walk these streets was not safe. You had a lot of prostitution, a lot of pimps, a lot of gangs. And it was just a neighborhood that you really didn't want to walk down. And the transformation over the years has now turned into that rooftop, elegance, European style. You know, you put the highliner in. But back in the heyday, it's not a place you wanted to be.
The meat district really was mostly meat packers when I moved there. And you would see sides of beef hanging out, or boxes of chickens, or large trash cans full of sheep's hooves that had been cut off.
The neighborhood changed every day. It started as a very gritty industrial area at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And by 12 o'clock, the meat packers had really closed their doors, packed up, and the more elegant restaurants and boutiques had opened, and at night it became a kind of frenzied nighttime place. Until about 2 to 4 in the morning, when meat packers literally bumping into the partygoers, but the meat packers came back, and then one day they didn't come back. It was over.
You couldn't even get through the streets, they were so busy. You'd go up 14th Street, you know where the Apple store is now. Starting over there, it was complete gridlock, because you'd have trailers backed in to both sides of the street.
Well, it was all this slurry because the meats would be hung up outside on the railings, and they would power wash the beef off the carcasses. And what would happen is you'd have all that gray slurry that would go right into the cobblestones. So it's really funny because once they started all of these high-end retail stores and the hotels and the different clubs, real posh clubs that started coming up, you'd have these girls that are walking around on the cobblestones with Jimmy Choos on, slipping and sliding and breaking ankles. Because all the slurry, that's what's going to happen. So if you knew anything about this area, you'd probably wear rubber soles instead of Jimmy Choos.
It was meat packing, and then it was restaurants. There was a lot of restaurants here, and then the restaurants took off, and retail, and mostly, you know, the big chain, the brands, you know, like the big brands. Now you're seeing also how the tech industry is coming, and it's changing a little bit, you know, the dynamics of that.
The people that I met, and I met the meat packers first, they were really welcoming. I had a camera, and they had no one who kept coming back to show some interest in the work they did, and they were very dignified about it. They were proud of their work, but they were, you know, they were people who could be swept aside. After all, one, Raymond, who was a big source of information for me, he said, well, why would you do this if you could do anything else? And that was exactly what the Meatpacking District was. It was an entry into the United States. There were many immigrants there. It was how you could start, how you could get a foothold in the United States, how you could make a life, raise a family, and sometimes really do it very well.
We got rid of all the trucks that used to back up along 15th Street because they were making deliveries either to what is now the Google building or the Chelsea Market and that block. We have very few trucks now. Now we have taxi cabs.
When it was designated a historic district, it was the first commercial historic district that didn't have a consistent building form.
The show Sex and the City used to come down, the girls used to come down here at night to drink. And then they...
Yeah, I'm not sure of the effect of Sex and the City. Sex and the City mostly had the effect of making the lines at Magnolia impossibly long.
So between Pastis, Sex and the City, Soho House coming here, you know, it became cool. And I'd say those three things were the magnet for everybody else to start coming here.
Yeah, Pastis was a great restaurant. Tried to pretend to be a real neighborhood restaurant. Wasn't exactly, but it was a great spot. Restaurants, when they first started opening, other than Florent, just weren't that good.
Florent was sort of an interesting guy. His restaurant became a destination restaurant, but I wouldn't say he was one of the transforming factors, because he was here long before it got cool.
Yeah, it was this beacon of light in this otherwise very dark, grim part of the city, so it was a fun place to go. It was open all night, And Florent is quite a character. He remains that today.
In some buildings early on, according to Florent, if you went upstairs, that's where the artists were. And for a while, his restaurant, and it wasn't only his restaurant, before he owned it, it was the only restaurant in the area, so artists would come in there.
What really put it over the top was the High Line when that opened, which is a little later to become trendy. But that's what really brought the huge tourist crowds.
They just opened up the High Line, and they have redone this whole area.
I think that people give a little bit more credit to the High Line that they deserves, for the changes that had happened in the neighborhoods around the High Line. The two co-founders of Friends of the High Line were fighting the city not to demolish the structure.
And we have around the corner, which has been the same for about 40 years, is a bar called Hogs and Heifers, which is right here on my hard hat. That's where all the ironworkers go. And that bar has been the same for a long time. A lot of knuckleheads are in that bar. Hogs and Heifers, and that has not changed.
Hogs and Heifers was always unique, and it had a sister restaurant actually in this Flatiron building where there's a burger place now.
Me personally, I've been working here for 10 years. Well, they've gentrified the neighborhood, so they pushed out a lot of the mom and pop businesses out of this area in order to put in more high-end retail stores and really expensive hotels that, quite frankly, I mean, only a small percentage of New York that can even afford to stay in them.
And a lot of these areas that were neglected, all of a sudden could be perfect place, for the expansion of the economic development of the city. I think the High Line is a good thing for the neighborhood, and has the High Line support some of the changes happening in the neighborhood or help us accelerate that? That's true, but I think you should see, the problem as a whole, and you should, like this administration now is talking about affordable housing and is talking about mixed use.
The traditional boundaries of the Meatpacking District are zoned M1 through 5, meaning there is no legal residential use allowed in the neighborhood. Gentrification is typically a residential concept. Meat packers moved out and other industry came in. This was a very organic development. Lauren Danzinger, Executive Director, Meatpacking District Improvement Association.
Obviously, those of us who do live in the district want to emphasize that there are a lot of residents in the district. The people who run the MPIA would like to minimize the influence of residents in the district because residents cause trouble for business improvement districts very often. And a lot of New Yorkers simply, at a very gut level, don't like the idea of a business improvement district. It somehow seems to them as though the city is about residents versus businesses, as though we don't use businesses or need businesses ourselves. So they have a kind of quick, almost unthinking gut level reaction against bids very often, with some good reasons. Bids are for businesses, and we do have conflicts of interest sometimes.
Many people that have been in this neighborhood for so long, they were seeing that everything was changing. What is the one thing that we cannot stop change, and it could be the constant? And it was the architecture, right, and the building stock.
The good news was that early on it was designated an historic district, so there's been some control over what could be torn down and how things got rebuilt. So it's retained its diversity and at the same time has upgraded entirely.
I think the High Line opened the door to think creatively about what do you do with that infrastructure and with that assets that the city has, and in creating economic development.
On a Saturday night or a Friday night, you'll see how many clubs they have in this neighborhood. They got a lot of clubs here in this neighborhood. And this neighborhood has transformed a lot within, say, the last 20 years.
From the Jobagi wholesale meat business to restaurants such as Florent and Pastis in the 80s and 90s, to the High Line and the Gansevoort Hotel today, the Meatpacking District has morphed into a trendy neighborhood where locals and tourists converge. Is this progress? That seems to be a matter of opinion.